Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Particle Accelerator podcast, where we talk to future thinking business leaders about how to accelerate their business and grow their team. I got an amazing guest here today, Pratik, and I talked to him last week, and I was so excited about the product and problem that he's solving that I wanted all of you to meet him. Pratik, would you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Ben, for having me over. Hi, everyone. My name is Pratik Verma. I'm the founder and CEO of Okahu AI, and we help people who build AI agents find and fix issues in their AI agents so they can actually get reliable production ROI from them.
That's awesome. So, Pratik, every CTO I talk to right now has the same problem. Their team built an agent, it demos beautifully, they put it in front of customers, and then within 2 weeks, they're getting tickets they can't reproduce, costs they can't predict, and behavior they can't explain. You've built a whole company on the gap between those two states. Where does it actually break first?
Yeah, we find that. So I think that one of the most interesting thing is when people start putting agents into production, the questions that they ask the agent to, or tasks they ask the agent to perform in the demo environments are very narrow. But the actual real life users are quite broad because their expectations of AI agents is pretty high because they've dealt with ChatGPT and things like that. So when they ask questions, they ask open-ended questions, which means you run into edge cases that you didn't design for initially. And secondly, when they ask questions, they're usually the task is about looking at data, doing some translation, doing some summarization. And a lot of the data that you start building in demos tend to be very curated, very nice, very clean, very small. But when they start putting these agents into real production, that's when you get into accessing data that is real life. Most of it is missing context. Most of it is missing metadata. Some of it is wrong. Some of it is missing. So those are kind of one of the first two, few places where agents stumble when they go from lab to actual use.
Yeah, so when an agentic app fails in production, what's the most common root cause you see? The model, retrieval layer, the infrastructure, or the orchestration glue between them?
It's the orchestration glue between them. I think that's where we see a lot of flexibility because it's very open-ended. We're relying on these agents. They're actually powerful because they're able to route based on what the user's question is differently each time, based on the context it prepared, based on how it did things before. So it's really where the orchestration fails. It's a orchestration that makes it super flexible and powerful, but that's where that ambiguity makes it fail the most. And in fact, usually when somebody's coding an agent, what they're really doing is describing a behavior. In fact, most of the times we see people using coding agents like Claude, Codex, and Copilot to build their code. So they're actually giving it prompt them what the agent should do. The code that the coding agent generates basically encapsulates that behavior, but necessarily because of the instructions you give them are super broad, it's the orchestration layer where everything fails. And usually you end up running into, the most common situation is an incorrect tool usage or incorrect decision to use the incorrect tool based on missing context. So those are the two most common ones, like the most immediate ones that we see that people face because there's a divergence between what data and users' asks are in production, very open-ended, from what they are in demo, which is very, happy path scenario.
Yeah, we've definitely seen like noun confusion, especially, you're talking to a data model or a system that's more structured. And so I saw this on an accounting system where the users kept saying chart of accounts, but internally it was just account type. And so chart of accounts and account type, that synonym locking wasn't there for in the system. The agent wasn't understanding that correlation between the nouns, and users were becoming frustrated as they couldn't ask questions about account type. We realized it pretty quickly, but yeah, the time cycle without an observability tool was pretty long. We had to review a lot of traces to figure that out. So what's the failure mode that surprises engineering leaders the most, the one they didn't even know to look for?
Yeah, so one of the interesting ones, like I'll give you an example from somebody that we were working with. They were creating a text to SQL type of a tooling, which allowed them to query some marketing data so that they can figure out who to target in the right place. And it turns out some of the names of client versus product versus team versus member Inside, they had a mental model of it, but inside the databases, there were slightly different ambiguity there in terms of how the tables were named. And so it ended up returning back the data, targeting data for member and client switched. So your marketing operations can't really, solve that problem. And the interesting part about that is this team thought they had good cataloging of their data sets. They had good names of their table. They had all the metadata, but the ambiguity about the underscore versus, spaces or dots, that naming convention is so similar that it's very easy to run into an issue, something like that. So that was kind of one of the interesting things that these people, in fact, they published an article on it, on how to test against that afterwards as a kind of test demo of, hey, look at all of the things that we found and where these agents kind of, surprised us about failing.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. So where does a traditional observability, Datadog, New Relic, CloudWatch, App Insight world fall short for AI workloads? What is structurally different about trace through an agent versus trace through a microservice?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's kind of two parts to the problem. Most of the observability stacks that grew up in the cloud native era, they were designed to basically instrument all kinds of app services and code and underneath, and they were designed for dealing with large volume of data. Very simple signals, but large volume of data, where the problem to solve was, hey, how can I make the human dashboard super usable for the kind of data and deal with a large volume of data? So you'll see that, one of the biggest things where Datadog even charges by is the volume of data and managing that. And so that kind of is a problem. Now, for agentic application, the problem's not quite did a particular microservice fire or not. The problem now is mostly, traditionally they would call APM, application performance management, but this is more of the agent logic management. That's kind of what you're dealing with. So the big problem now is I can instrument, the first part of the problem is how do I instrument and get the relevant signals from the agent behavior? So if I just look at what happened, went into the agent and what the agent output I got, most of the time that's not sufficient to figure out what happened because the agent actually fails in the way it routes the request. So you need to go inside. And the traditional way of tracing application and capturing telemetry, the gold standard is open source, open telemetry. Everybody, does the coding to enable open telemetry, instrument everything that they can, create the most large volume of data. The problem with agentic application is, like in 2026, most code is written using coding agents. So you don't actually write it, you prompt it. So you're not quite familiar with which methods and functions to instrument. And secondly, the output that's generated, the code that's generated that operates the agent is usually using one of the agentic framework. That's what the coding agent relies on. So you'll see LangGraph a lot, you'll see Vercel, you'll see Crew, you'll see Google ADK. So these functions are written there. So most of the interesting thing that's happening is happening inside of the framework. So when you auto instrument, you're going to get lots of meaningless function names and everything else. So we tackled that first part of the problem with an open source package instrumentation library that's designed just for agentic workflow that allows you to basically drop it in just like you use any other auto instrumentation library. But then the signal that you get out is super clean and well designed for the agentic traces. So you don't have to solve the cleansing problem. So that's kind of capturing the signal. And then the second part of the problem is, great, I looked at it. Most dashboards and observability tool are designed for ops workload, where a human being finds an incident. They do the investigation. Then they do some dashboarding, picturing to find, what happens and find the patterns. Well, most of the time, the person now who's going to make a change isn't going to be a human being. It's actually going to be your coding agent. So you're going to prompt it to send it to the coding agent. So the problem that we ended up realizing was, you have to not create raw signals and dashboards. We have those, but I think the problem remains, how do I basically take the analysis, the output of my traces and telemetry, my traces and telemetry telling me, how can I agentify it so that my agents are operating and iterating through the analysis? But if I just stop there, it's not sufficient because my goal isn't to find, my goal is to fix. So we've realized that getting that analysis into a format that the coding agent understands and can loop over until it fixes is really kind of the novel new thing that's necessary to make agents work, which is very different than, static code which goes through very well-defined pathways. So those are the two problems that we sort of learned as we started building our own agents. So we started building, our first step was building an observability agent to solve the problem of monitoring, applications. All of us are ex-Microsoft people. My last company was a data security company that was acquired by Microsoft. But so we try to start, solving the security.
I feel like I should apologize or something. Oh, no. Like, oh, I'm sorry.
Hey, it was a great time. I learned a lot at the scale. In fact, I think one of my first eye-opening events was one of the data security components that we built in Azure Storage ended up having trillions of events in a month. And I had never seen T with a trillion events anywhere in my life before.
That's cool.
So that was a experience. But as I mentioned, as we started building our agents to solve that problem, we realized our Okahu agent was running into problems. So we had to build tooling to capture the telemetry that we couldn't get from just open telemetry. And so that's how we ended up contributing to the open source Monocle project.
Yeah, cool. Well, I mean, cost is its own reliability problem. Teams ship an agent and then the bill triples in a month. How do you instrument for that without making developers do extra work?
Yeah. So what's interesting is most of the hard part in capturing the telemetry is getting the right signal, but aggregating across what the dimensions you care about, the things that you can control and things you don't. So what we learned was in an agentic application, which is designed for a multi-turn autonomous sort of behavior with interruptions for clarification, there's a pattern called, tracking the session. Most of the frameworks provide that functionality to be able to say a given user request that starts with a prompt, and then you have some tasks in the work that are related. So you need to be able to figure out what are all the autonomous tasks that are coming in, what's the cost of the turn across that entire session. So because of the way we've implemented our instrumentation, you get not only what did a individual task happen as a turn happen as the agent jumped around other agents and tools to figure out the problem. Adding that up is interesting, but most of the times where agent fail is when it tries to loop. It tries to keep doing the stuff autonomously even though it's kind of run far away from when it was originally trying to do. So we add up the token counts and aggregate it, and then we actually have alerts and built-in and budget counts built in the testing. So you can basically say, hey, let's flag the agentic sessions where the total turn count token has exceeded a budget, either at the session level or at the turn level, and what can you do about that? And typically there's a lot of analytics that goes into building that. It turns out there's only two things you care about: things that are going on forever that don't have an outcome that you care about, or an individual thing that takes too long because you're being lazy and you're feeding it entire context. And then the third one is failed on non-productive usage. So you made the agent do something, it spent a bunch of token, but it didn't actually accomplish it. So if you get, and these are kind of very repeatable problem, if you figure out where wasted token count is, where the work wasn't accomplished, that's an opportunity to fix. And that's something that we packaged out of the box. When we basically say how much was non-productive, subset of the session that you need to sort of focus in on, where they just keep on running forever, what the cost of that is to you, that's an opportunity for you to fix. And then third one is when you take individual decisions or individual tasks that are too expensive to compute and decide on, where the opportunity is reduce and optimize the context, optimize the memory. Those are sort of super simple things you can do. And getting the answers to that is very standard sort of problem for us. So we've automated that.
That's cool. So tell me about eval versus observability. A lot of teams confuse the two. Draw the line for me there.
Yeah, and I feel like every time I talk to somebody, this is super interesting as you bring up, evals are kind of one of that ambiguous thing. It can mean anything. People used to say evals were things that were basically taking test data and analyzing things on top of them to improve the model. So the way we think about evals are good software engineering practices require you to test your whatever you built and make sure it works correctly every single time. Well, that's really easy to do when you have very deterministic responses. But as agents we know aren't very deterministic, they can flow different things. So how do I articulate what an acceptable test pass looks like, criteria looks like if I have very ambiguous responses. So this is where we think of evals as more flexible, human-like evaluation of the results, either from looking at the inputs and outputs or the way the application behaves, to understand, did it pass? Did it do what it was meant to do or not? And so packaging that up is, it's basically a set of instructions you tell to an LLM to judge, to determine, is it, in scope or not in scope. And so that is kind of an analysis for the evaluation. Now, the problem with observability difference between evaluation is, for evaluation to be effective, you need raw ground truth. And that's where observability comes in, which is what happened in the underlying system. And so the combination of saying, hey, in this particular instance, what happened? Can I apply and throw, LLMs at it to figure out in a structured way, did it behave the way it did? Getting that as surrender data is a matter of evaluation. So I make it akin to tests. But when you combine that together, I'm not going to run one eval one time. What I'm really looking for is things across lots and lots of interactions. And that's where kind of an observability agent becomes an interesting thing, where you're going to say, I'm going to look at the results of one or many, many types of evaluations I did on traces or telemetry I collected from the agent operation. And then I'm going to figure out, how to deal with it. So I think there's a little bit of ambiguity, but the way we position and the way we think about observability is thinking about what happened. And evaluation is more about, hey, how do I know if it's the right thing that should have happened? And by the combination of two, I figure out across all of the ways agents can behave, for which user interactions, for what kind of agents, what kind of tools, what kind of task, is it behaving the way we want it to, and where it's not behaving the way we want it to, and where are the opportunities for us to actually, do something about it, what we can prompt versus what we cannot prompt.
Yeah, makes sense. I think my instinct here is I'm tracking with you. I'm understanding non-deterministic problems versus deterministic problems. Of course, in the software world, we've been in the deterministic, X basic math, right? X plus Y equals what it equals, right? Like we've been in that world. Non-determinism is a decision, multiple calculations, language. It's all these things that we're bringing into the equation. And you and I are deep into this agent world. What I want to do for a second is pull way back out to a much higher level and ask you, as you've seen this, give us an example of an agent that has been really deployed that's effectively solving a problem. When I think agent, I think human-like, and I think role-based. So I'm delegating it, and then I fed it a bunch of data so that it can do a good job at its role. And just tell us a story of how this played out. What was the enterprise trying to accomplish? And then what did they delegate to the agent? And then how did this learning process happen, both deterministic and non-deterministic? Just give us a really good example.
Yeah, I'm going to think about, so there's a contributor, Harshad. So, everyone loves Epson printers, right? We do a lot of printing at our place. It's super interesting. So there's a company that's a part of Epson, which basically helps you figure out how to deal with the software driver printers. And they release a bunch of things. They do lots of releases. Now, there's a person in that team who does a lot of QA analysis on top of it. On operations of these sort of QA analysis, before agents were a thing, what they had to do was every time a new build happened, it would happen on Windows, Mac, a bunch of other devices, and then logs were created from the build process someplace else, and they were stored in whatever local devices that were there. Now, it turns out they spent a lot of time previously, when a failure happened, to debug where the things were and to create the logs, fetch them, analyze them, and do a bunch of work. Right. So a lot of the manual labor that these folks really were facing, the QA team was really facing, was trying to figure out, how do I basically log into a VM to the right device, fetch the real data, do the basic triaging so that somebody else can even take a look at it. Now, it turns out that was a rife opportunity for them to figure out how to apply agents to them. So what they ended up doing was building a bunch of QA and ops agents. And basically the simplest task it was doing was, the hardest painful task was finding which devices to get the logs from, then fetching those logs, and then summarizing them and grouping them together to say which logs should go together, which failures were common, and then creating a particular, task in their issue tracking to say, hey, pay attention in these, test failures, pay attention to these areas. And these are the most important one. And here's the package of information about how to do that. And it turns out they were doing the QA. The ops would do different things. It would fetch the right logs, but it wouldn't summarize it. So a lot of logic of what the agents needed to do, which was fetch and triage, was dependent on they had to learn about it. So they, added, Monocle as an instrumentation library with the Okahu tooling. And they were able to figure out, hey, we had created this agent. In what scenarios, how would we have to change our prompts so that in what scenarios the grouping of the issues in the common area, the logs that were common, was actually useful. And then they added that to basically summarize the issues in the ticket, automatically create the ticket, and automatically assign the severity of the ticket. So they were taking, the original idea was super good. Prototype, fetch the logs, do some triaging, put the labels. But when they started operating it, they knew that they needed to change the logic of how the agent would triage. So they get the right level of information in their ticket and then the right severity assignment. And that was something that's what they used evaluation and play things to do with. And oftentimes, new issues happen. So they have to keep making sure that it doesn't regress. So this is where the super interesting thing comes up. They know what the scenario are that makes everything work. If they change their data pipelines or if they change their deployment pipelines, they have a regression test that allows them to figure out, hey, how does that actually not break the system? So I think this is, I think we're still in early days with this kind of operations. People are still learning. But the super interesting thing is it opened our eyes to what is possible. But when you start getting into the detail from, hey, it creates a ticket and it, assigns a label, it does the task, to, hey, I can rely on it 100 times so my QA teams can shrink the QA time, triage time from 30 sort of hours to a couple hours in an automated way with 15 minutes of dev effort as opposed to, uncertain time of dev effort. So that was kind of super eye-opening.
Yeah, that's cool.
Let me ask you something. You see a lot of these projects, you see a bunch of these, things that you're helping with. What examples do you want to share with us?
So great question. And my thought process is trying to prepare my next question for you. So it'll take me a second.
Yeah.
But no, so we're seeing it, we're working on an agent that looks at phone calls and what's going on the ground floor of a call center. And so we're building an agent right now that's looking at all those transcripts and really trying to advise the operational executive team, what could they do to move the needle? What could they do to create an amazing customer experience? And we're using, I didn't know about your tool until last week. So we're using, I think, Lang function as the observability layer there. And because, we want to make sure that we're making the part of the implementation is a customer service agent. Right. It's more hey, how can we answer some of the FAQ question? How can we help as much as possible? Because I would say the younger demographic user loves that. They're hey, I can jump on the phone. I know I'm talking to AI, but I'm getting stuff done and it's fast and effective. We see a lot more friction with the older demographic user that knows they're talking to an AI and is I want a human, I want a human, I want a human. And so we're trying to bridge that, and it's just really interesting. I mean, I was being generalistic, which is dangerous. We of course see examples throughout so it's not really an age thing. It's just people are embracing it on some ways and not embracing it in others. And so, you really want to make sure that a customer experience that there's not friction. So we're seeing these observability signals that are helping us to identify, where is this friction coming from? Is this a language issue? Synonyms are not well represented in the agent itself. And so, this is super exciting to me that we're running QA over the agent. But what's cool about it is it's happening in real time. We're not waiting for 100 people to go through the agent and hit the same, I want to talk to a human because this isn't working. And then the other, my wife and I, our birthdays are really close together. Hers is earlier in April about a week earlier in April than mine. And so we decided that we'd treat ourselves with new cell phones. And so we worked with AT&T to get the new cell phones, but hers didn't arrive. I kind of felt bad because mine arrived on time and then hers didn't. And I could see through the tracking
Yeah.
that like hers had been lost or stolen or there was a problem. Like the tracking was dead ended. And so I realized that the only way I was going to solve the problem was to call AT&T. And so I'm sitting here in AI IVR land with AT&T knowing that this scenario that I'm having, like it doesn't exist in the prompts and options.
Yeah.
I can go look online and do my own interaction with the online AI and realize that like this just doesn't exist. So try kind of playing with that and then, hey, I just need to talk to a human. But then I get to a human and it's super noisy in the background. When the agent picked up the phone, she can't stop laughing. I don't know what she's laughing about, but she's having trouble like gaining her composure to start working with me. And then even with the human agent, I have to go like, no, you're not hearing me. Like, look at the tracking number.
Yeah.
Something is broken here. And then, of course, then once I brought the attention to the issue, then it's like, oh, okay, I need to reorder this for you, and we need to get this back on track. So even as a consumer, I'm like, wow, this is a big problem.
Yeah.
Like, I see where commerce wants to go. I see the solutions we're trying to provide for enterprises. And so to bring it back to you, so we're shipping this operations agent. What are things that we should be instrumenting like from day one, like the smallest set of things we should instrument from day one?
Yeah. So I think that the good part is if you have the agent code anywhere else that you're going to deploy, you're going to write some code and you're going to deploy it. So oftentimes it's running in some app container. Just dropping in Monocle will instrument all the relevant pieces. And because if you use Monocle instead of just custom instrumentation or lots of other APM libraries, you're going to get just the right signal. So you won't have to deal with lots of like barrage of unnecessary data you have to deal with. So I think just dropping in Monocle is kind of usually the simplest step. And then what you will get out of it is whatever part of the agent that is being exercised. So that's a really good test to say, hey, in this application, I thought there were all going to be all this thing, but maybe the application never actually reached the agent or this particular tool you built, like this fancy tool where the deflection happens up ahead. So you'll be able to catch things like that automatically. So, typically, as I can say, we've spent time at Microsoft. We've spent time with folks like, banks and DBSs who use their own internal, systems. My last company, Blue Talon, we had data security that was repackaged by AWS for their EMR product. And so we've worked with all the different companies. And so what we figured out was it's very easy to put in the different containers. Like your app is going to run either in, Lambda functions, Azure functions, if you're doing serverless, or you may actually run it in like an agent native system like Agent Core or Foundry or Vertex. So what we figured out is when you go from your laptop to those environments, if you just add Monocle, which most of these things have the ability to do that, with the right environment variables, it'll send the signal right to these clouds, to native sources, and then you can also end up piping it to Okahu, where you can run all this sort of analytics capability. So like dropping that in allows you to enrich your existing telemetry. So wherever the next native pipelines work, they do well. But having the ability to also have Okahu look at that data allows you to, supplement whatever you've done there. So I think that's the easiest way to do it. And it's actually quite simple. You're going to run Python code somewhere, just add this Monocle library. You're going to run TypeScript, add a node library. It's kind of, pretty simple.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're also doing a lot of MCP servers to connect. You said dashboards are for humans. Agents need APIs.
Yeah.
And so bringing APIs into Claude and other tools has become a service for us to help people with. What does that look like? Can I put Monocle within the MCP layer and get intelligence back? Or what's the recommendation for observability there? Because I may not see exactly what's going on in the agent, but can I use this to also improve my MCP coding?
Yeah, absolutely. So typically what we've seen, the pattern we've seen is if you've already started with an API surface, you have an API management layer someplace already there. You have some coding instrumentation there. You're going to use Fast API or something like that. You've dropped it in. So Monocle allows you to see that. Typically, when you want to make it MCP enabled, you'll put an MCP gateway or something else in between, or you'll just recode it and recode it with fast MCP. So it turns out that Monocle already supports both of those. So if you instrument your application, no matter where they run, we either give you spans that are going to have the API payload or MCP sort of inferences as well. What happened? Now, the interesting thing about MCP server is most of the time, the coding agent that is, or some other agent that is relying on the MCP is coordinating and sending that information. So if you're in the MCP server, you don't actually see that. Like if I'm hosting a GitHub MCP server, lots of people are consuming it. I don't know what was the prompt or automation that gave me either the wrong payload for my MCP server or, the right information, or didn't even pick the right MCP server or MCP tool or not, because it's exposed someplace else. So what we have actually figured out is typically if you have an enterprise, you're going to have some application agent gateway. It's going to have an MCP call, either local tool or an MCP tool, where it's going to rely on your internal tools or somebody else's. So with Monocle, what you're able to do is instrument not only the agent that you coded, not only in the MCP server, but also Claude or Copilot or whatever harness you're using. And they all will have a common identifier because of the session, the way that's originating. So when you pull all those into Okahu, you end up actually answering the bigger question to say, hey, what did my user ask me for what did the user prompt my coding agent or Claude agent for co-working to do? And then when Claude picked the tool, did it pick the right tool? And the interesting part about that is once you're instrumenting it, you can actually then rely on that information and tell Claude, hey, this thing didn't work really well. Go update the Claude skill that you used for this particular type of task. So you actually start, creating institutional knowledge for things that didn't used to be there before. Now, if you're going to use Claude or Copilot or something else for co-working, that ability to take that information, instrument what happened in Claude in terms of what the user asked for, and making it available to the fulfillment of the MCP tool, that is kind of a very unique thing. We were in fact actually talking to some folks from Datadog, their MCP servers. They wanted to know for themselves all the tools that are being built at different parts of Datadog's team when they expose it through the MCP server to their customers. The open question for them is, hey, how is it being used? So an interesting conversation we talked about was, hey, let's soak in you have developers using coding. Why not instrument the coding agent and dog food your own MCP server that way, so do I need to change and tweak my tools? Do I need to change and do I need to add a new tool? Do I need to set a better description on the tool? Do I need to basically add an extra layer of deflection in front? Or is it something that I need to really give a directive back to the coding agent or whoever the calling agent is to make that change? So we actually had quite a good, this the funny, beautiful thing about this thing is, MCPs became popular, about a year ago? And then I think we forget these are very ubiquitous things, but all of them are very, very new. And we're all collectively learning, like, hey, instead of this API, which I think building a cloud and API layer took 7-8 years, MCP became super popular in 18 months. Agents, super popular in last 18 months. Coding agents with Claude, 6 months ago, I feel like there was a turning point where the light bulb went off to say, hey, all the visions of where they were saying coding agents could be are actually starting to be real. So I think, I feel like in this phase, learning, experimentation, tweaking, connecting as many dots as possible is kind of the name of the game here.
Yeah, no, it's really cool. I'm thinking about the SRE world as it evolves, right? Where you're as we were advising our clients, two things that are hitting me here. One is how cool it is to use MCP to interact with things, just as a person using MCP to connect with HubSpot, for example. Nobody really enjoyed, even though HubSpot's a super powerful tool, nobody super enjoys going there to update the lead status and create the deal, right? So to be able to have a call with a prospect and record that with your note taker and then have AI connect that with your deal flow and deal data, it's it's so fun. It's wow, I can just tell scheduled tasks to go look at my calls and update my CRM. Like, this is really cool. And for product developers, that's kind of mind blowing. Like, I don't have to go build an LLM. I don't really even have to build a super dynamic experience in my app. I just have to enable people to leverage what's already out there. And so that's kind of the first, like, as a consumer of all this getting heavy, like, that's really emerging into a common business practice.
So tell me a little bit about kind of like your team as well. I think you've seen probably, you help a lot of people build these things. You have teammates that have, started learning. Are you saying like a lot of your teammates who would have historically gone into dashboards and stuff now are actually kind of just using CLI tools and, agents to delegate some of these low-lying tasks, and it's making them more effective?
It's starting to happen. As I sample across, through the podcast and then through my customer advisory board type of like CTOs, CEOs, COOs that are using us as a technology partner, I'm starting to ask the questions like, how are you using AI on a daily basis? And they're starting to realize the power of the connector, and it's emerging. There's a transition happening where people got so much value out of search and summarize that I call that kind of era one here with AI usage to agentic, where I'm actually delegating work to role-based things. Now, every month, Claude, Anthropic, and probably others. I'm kind of turning into an Anthropic fanboy here, but like realizing what an agent is, even if it's just a scheduled task running in cowork. And so they're starting to learn that, and then they're starting to realize, oh, I don't have to go use UIs. I don't have to go do certain things. And then I'm teaching them like, hey, why don't you build a second brain for that big project that you're working on? Ask Claude to go collect all the transcripts from certain clients. Why don't you start building a context repository to really hold this and get out of search and summarize? Like, just kind of graduate from search and summarize. And some people that are just maybe a little bit slower to adopt or were kind of romanticized by search and summarize, they're going, oh, okay, that's what all the craziness is about. Now I'm creating a legal agent to create edit my MSAs, or I'm creating a personal assistant agent to check my calendar and help me prep for meetings. They're just starting to really figure this out, that as they give it more data, and it's so hungry for data, as they give it more data and then they come up, the idea of a second brain or a contextual repository is probably missed on the average professional today, but it's starting to come around. Like, we're really seeing, and then brands, startups, and enterprises are, oh, okay, now we have to embrace this. Let's build an MCP server. So that's kind of how that trajectory is happening. Like, one of my past guests is the CEO of GLX Studio. He has a really cool video personalization product. And he's interacting with his own product in Claude more than he's using his own UI that he built.
That's super
he created
interesting.
A skill and an MCP, and he just connected up. And then he's starting to I'm sending him people because he has a really good product. And when people need to do educational marketing, it's a great product. So I'll even send them, he just sends them a skill file. Like, hey, just put this in your Claude and send it your sales presentation, and we'll have a video back to you right there in Claude. So I think that's super cool.
That's the funny part. How much do you think, we saw previously people selling plugins into IDEs, and that was kind of a big thing where people could share knowledge. It sounds like, and then having MCP servers being around allowed, the next level of extensibility, so people could write systems that didn't have to be very precise and know about APIs. I feel like we're at this moment where there's going to be a skill share, skill repository that's going to become kind of the next big thing. It's a little bit less deterministic, a little bit more ambiguous. I feel like, I do if there's a lot of skill, like equivalent of, MCP repositories, there's skill repositories that are super popular?
So yeah, I see it more. I'll be sarcastic. I'm seeing it more like I think the CEO of Y Combinator launched a repository of just a bunch of markdown files, and everybody
Mm-hmm.
was kind of like mind blown by it.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of rolled my eyes. Like we've been doing that for 6 months. Like thinking about for us those are intellectual property, like our
Right.
software factory and those skill files and everything we're learning about the guardrails around agentic programming becomes something we're less excited about sharing.
Mm-hmm.
We'll happily share it with our own clients, but putting those out publicly, we're just kind of like, should we do that, right? But it's starting to happen,
Yeah.
and I think just even that case study with Zach from GLX Studio, if it makes like he's still getting his subscription for the video creation software, like you still have to go pay your $99 a month, and they should, right? So you're still paying for the service, but if you want to access it in the agent, the cool thing for the brand is for the product is you don't have to build a
Right.
conversational interface.
Right. Right.
And that's what I see happening is you have, it was forever it was okay, I need the portal, right? Way back when I need to have a presence
Yep.
online, I need to have a login, I need to have a
Mm-hmm.
dashboard. Then it was mobile, I got to have a mobile app.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's like no, I need agent communication. I need an agent to agent layer. I think there's also something around voice enablement
Mm-hmm.
too. Like I just want people to be able to talk to the brand over the phone or on the web. But the voice in my pocket is like sci-fi becoming
Yeah.
real.
You're gonna become starting as a Claude fanboy, and you're gonna start getting to OpenClaw fanboy with doing everything over WhatsApp and text messages, huh?
So we went there, and honestly, I'm turned on to a project. It's a smaller, less popular project. I mean, OpenClaw, just the YouTube real
Mm-hmm.
estate on OpenClaw is very vast.
Mm-hmm.
But there's another one that I like called Hermes
Oh yeah.
Agent, and we love that one because it's allowing us to connect up to, if we wanted to, WhatsApp or Slack and give that. But that's what we're kind of using as a lever for our software factory because it's also self healing, or it's kind of has some of this observability concepts built into it. So it's tuning itself, it's expanding itself, and so to drive sub agents, we're using Hermes agent with Claude Code delegates so that we can still leverage our .claude environment and all that learning we're doing about good coding practice. We don't want to have a different environment when somebody just opens up Claude Code to go work on some stuff. We want to keep congruency there, and Hermes Agent is allowing us to do that. And it's honestly not as scary as OpenClaw. It's Python based rather than Bash based.
Yeah.
And if you think about Bash is very complex, right? It's very wide open and complex and gives too much control over the subsystem, the operating system. So I like that too. I like the security trade-offs that Hermes, or Hermes, if you will,
So you want to
is
hear a good
making.
funny story? So I was contacting people on sort of LangGraph repo recently just to get their feedback on how they're using LangGraph. So one of the people who I emailed off of their public email on GitHub using the GitHub ID responded back, and they said, "Oh, I like Monocle. It's got all this thing, and it, like huge super analysis." I'm like, "Oh, great. I would love to get your feedback and jump on a call with you." So I sent him a reply email. I got a response back. "Oh, I'm a Hermes agent. I cannot take phone requests, but when the person who's there, available, they'll reach out to you." I found that super amazing. It kind of it tickled my fancy because I was not expecting somebody to just have open email sort of access to Hermes on something that I would have thought would have been their, GitHub account being a very, personal jewel kind of that they rely on. So it was kind of quite a interesting learning experience.
Yeah, cool. Well, I want to be super
Yeah.
respectful of your time, and this has been super fun. So I'll just ask this in closing. If we run this conversation back in 3 years
Mm-hmm.
and AI workloads are mature, what does this world look like uh, that we're not seeing yet today? Like, what does your world look like in in 3 years?
Yeah, I think the beautiful thing is we're as much of self-healing, self-improving things as there can be. Like I imagine that world where people have initial prompts of coding agents, then they have observability agents that are always running in, creating insights on how the agents operated. That feeds back into the coding agent to create new emergent behaviors, and that can automatically handle most of the new adjacent edge cases. And then there's some feedback on it that says, hey, I need to create a new feature development on the cases that I have not encountered that these users are asking me for. That's when a human being would come in to say, hey, okay, how do I create new interesting behaviors to expand the scope of what my agents can do? And I think I'm hoping in the next 3 years, if we're super successful, a lot of the observability agent stuff that we're working on will make the coding agents super sophisticated as, that software engineering will be like very interesting place where every functional of software engineering, the task is done in an automated way with coding agents, review agents, QA agents, observability agents. But there's some human being who's just having to make a decision about what do I want it to be when it diverges, when I've encountered a new experience or there's a shift in what people are asking me for. I'm looking forward to that. I don't think we're that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's super cool. I think I think I think we're gonna get bored with the 2-dimensional internet, like the browser, and I mean, and I'm influenced by science fiction here a little bit, but that some sort of metaverse or Second Life or like separate space emerges that is a more escaped experience or a more fulsome experience. I'm not saying I want that to happen. I just think that like we're going to rattle around in what the current internet is so much that we're going to get really bored of it, and all of this horsepower, all of this momentum will need a new forest to burn. Economies burn fire, like burn fuel. They're looking for new fuel to burn, and I feel like the internet's going to run out of fuel for innovation, and so we're going to have to create kind of a new playing field, and I can't imagine that being less immersive or equally as immersive as what we're currently experiencing. And as all the people who are growing up playing video games from like age 6 to 25 are going to be like, man, I love this experience. I think we're kind of lucky that they're experiencing it in like 8-bit graphics in Minecraft and Roblox. But as they come up and they want, I want a more immersive experience, then turning AI loose on that is where I think in 3 years we're going to be talking about, okay, that is starting to perk up. And then Neil Stephenson is really good in his in the Baroque cycles about talking about, well, then there's a certain tier or maybe a class of people, he calls them the Victorians, that start to walk away from technology. They still use it, but they're very discreet about it, right? They care about handmade clothes, and they start to separate themselves from the digital. And I think we're also seeing that like just because technology exists doesn't mean it's good. Just because I can fall in love with an AI girlfriend doesn't mean I should, right? So I think there's this thing that creates a separation around what is our personal standard around where we want this in our lives versus where we don't. And I think that'll be really clear in 3 years' time. And I'm also excited to see what that looks like.
Yeah. I too. Maybe, hey, it'll be so real that maybe I'll be touching grass and telling my agent to do the task that I wanted to do at the same time, and I don't have to worry about a screen.
That's right. That would be great too. Yeah. Cool. Well, I appreciate your time. I'm really stoked about what you're creating. I had a bunch more questions about your open source versus commercial, but I think you addressed that really well. And we'll make sure that both the Monocle project and your commercial product, your LinkedIn, all of that is in the show notes. So if people want to learn more, you're super easy to find and reach, and they can reach out and ask you.
Absolutely. And thanks for the time, man. It's great.
Yeah, appreciate you.